Bright Memory Infinite is a curious animal. Everyone is saying how it was made by a single developer. Lately I've been seeing more and more Chinese games being offered on Steam. Shuin Sword 7 comes to memory. These games felt somewhat rough around the edges but somehow appealed to me, especially because of the setting. They often revolve around Chinese culture and mythology, which is a fresh breath of air. If you've watched my previous videos, you will know that I am absolutely fed up with the constant barrage of Viking lore in every game. One of the first things you will notice is the fact that the game supports all ultrawide resolutions natively. Both 32:9 and 21:9 work great and look awesome. And speaking of looking awesome, this game's visuals are probably its best quality. The graphics look nice, the weather effects are awesome, and a lot of people have been mentioning that the ray tracing is amazing. Since I can't afford a GPU that supports it, I'll have to take their word for it. We get to play as Shelia, a young hot chick who is some sort of a one-woman army. She's amazing at shooting guns and sword fighting, but terrible at piloting a fighter jet. At the beginning of the game, we actually witness her doing some really stupid maneuvers which lead to the destruction of an otherwise awesome jet. And if you're wondering about the story, I am too. It feels like someone sat down and wrote some ideas in the form of buzzwords, then went away and came back later after having forgotten everything from before and just made the game based on random buzzwords. For example, Shelia will occasionally see the enemies disappear and be replaced by ancient Chinese soldiers who wield melee weapons and bows. Is this really happening, or is it perhaps a hallucination? We do see that there is some kind of a black hole in the distance at the beginning of the game, so it might be somehow interfering with it, but the story just doesn't tell us anything, so it could be any of these things. Killing the ancient soldiers does give us upgrade points, which at least is a nice thing. In addition to that, you can also find more such points hidden throughout the map. However, the word hidden might be an overstatement here. I never had to use any of my skills in order to find the points, and some of them involve movement skills. They were mostly just placed a few meters away from the otherwise extremely linear path. You can invest these points into skills which improve your combat abilities in general. And speaking of the combat, it felt a bit like Call of Duty on steroids. The guns, of which there are relatively few, generally felt very satisfying to use. Each of them has a more powerful secondary fire mode, which adds to the fun factor. In addition to that, you also have your blade, which is very effective at close range and will obliterate most of the opponents pretty quickly. The game lets you deflect bullets with it as well and parry melee attacks, which can be followed up with attacks of your own. The main problem here is that these sword skills cost energy, which feels insufficient for the most part. For example, I would parry an attack, then follow up with an upward thrust and slash at the enemy. If I wanted to do something more than that, I couldn't, since my energy is almost empty from the upward attack that I used at the start of it. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the weird button configuration that was set by default here. For example, the block was bound to tap, but the worst by far is the fact that your F button, the button which you use to activate your kinetic blast, is the same one you need to use to pick up items. So what would happen all the time is, you would try to pick up ammo or a skill point and would instead use your blast ability. This is not a big issue, but quite annoying and could have been easily avoided by making our character pick up ammo by simply getting close to it. I did mention how the energy is often not enough. The problem with it is that we have a bunch of interesting abilities, but it feels like the game's crippling us by not allowing us to combine them properly due to this energy issue. You cannot increase that resource with upgrades either. It's the same amount from start to finish, although you will actually gain a few additional abilities as you progress and level stuff up. And speaking of start to finish, the game took me 2.5 hours to beat, and that was only because I was checking all over the place for any hidden skill points. For a game that costs less than €17, this is not terrible, but since there is no story to speak of, it all felt a bit short and repetitive. The game also lacks variety in terms of enemies. In addition to all of this, I was annoyed by how bullet spongy they were. You better be prepared to empty a full magazine into the more basic enemies if you aren't hitting their heads. And by the way, the game is fully voice acted. Naturally, voice acting is poor, but I still find that it is much better than having none. If anything, it's the scripts that felt really terrible. Oh, and did I mention that this short game has paid DLC which gives your hot character a more slutty outfit? I mean, that would have been fine with me. I love slutty outfits for hot characters. If I could at the very least see her, that would make some sense. But outside of a few short cutscenes and assassination animations during the stealth segment, there are no other times when you can see Shelia. Why would you pay for this? Oh yeah, you heard that right. Stealth segment. The game has it, and it's bad. I can see the point. The developer wanted to slow down the player since the game's already super short. In addition to that, one could say that the stealth brings variety. The problem with this is that Bright Memory Infinite is a fast-paced shooter. We move quickly, throw enemies around, shoot and slash with the sword. A stealth section not only feels out of place, but also kills the game's rhythm. This was also the one part of the game where I wasted the most time by having to replay it, since being seen leads to an immediate failure and the game is very clunky when it comes to those mechanics. On the other end, I did enjoy the vehicle section. It felt different but still fitting. That is the kind of action I would have loved to see when a dev wants to give me variety. There were also a few bugs, but they were luckily only cosmetic ones. Here's a funny example. At the end of the day, Bright Memory Infinite was mediocre at best. While the graphics and setting were fantastic, the gameplay was mostly repetitive, at times annoying and rarely enjoyable. It felt like there's potential here, but the developers simply failed to build on it. The game is extremely short, and while its price reflects that, I feel like it isn't worth it. A price under $10 would have been more appropriate here. I found out there was another game before this one which is very similar but not quite the same. It seems like my work here simply isn't done yet. So be sure to keep your eyes open for that review as well, which I'll be doing very shortly. With that having been said, I want to thank you for watching Game Filter. I hope to see you again next time. Until then, have a great day. This is Nino signing off.